Hey guys, it's Kevin, my review for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And what Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is essentially about is we center on this friendship in 1969 between Rick Dalton, who is this very acclaimed and adored actor who has been in all these westerns and things like that, but he's starting to fade out a bit. He's trying to, stay relevant and things like that. And then you also have a stunt double, Cliff Booth, who is much more easygoing and much more laid back. And basically in this film, we follow their adventures. We follow them trying to just make it and trying to adjust to the inevitable transition that the movie scene and the industry overall is undergoing, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood overall, I was so hyped for this film. This was easily my most anticipated of the entire year. The second that I heard that Tarantino was doing a movie in the 60s and that Leo was going to be involved, that he was the main lead, and that it was, surround against, like, the Hollywood industry and things like that, I was immediately sold. And you guys know how much I adore Tarantino. I reviewed both of the films I haven't seen of his prior to this. Actually, prior to this film, I rewatched almost every single Tarantino film. I did not get to The Hateful Eight. Might finally do that, after I review this. I'm not sure. But regardless, I am a huge Tarantino fan. I think he is one of the most creative and dynamic directors out there right now. I don't think there are too many talents on the level of him. And so whenever he has a movie coming out, I am automatically sold. But this was on another level for me, between the stellar cast, between the concept. I was very excited to see how it turned out. And look, when going into a film like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and my expectations are at an all-time high, it's very easy for this film to have disappointed me. But I have to say, I really don't think this did at all. If anything, it kind of exceeded my expectations, because this is a much different film than I'm expecting, but one that I very much welcome. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is easily one of Tarantino's most different films yet, but one of his probably most heartwarming and personal for sure. And we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And I mean, as always in any Tarantino film, the cast here is completely stellar. Everyone is on their A game. Everyone just gives such an incredible performance. But let's first talk about Leonardo DiCaprio, who, I mean, what is there to say about this guy that I haven't said before? I think he's the best actor working today, and it's performances like this that very much do show why. The character of Rick Dalton, no, he's not a real one. This guy is very larger than life. He's someone who takes himself as an actor extremely seriously, and because of that, he is a lot of fun in this role. He is someone who, he takes it so seriously that it's hilarious how serious he is about it. I mean, something as simple as just missing a few lines, he feels like he's completely embarrassed himself in front of everyone, or he's offered to do some sort of, like spaghetti western, and he feels they're making a mockery out of him and things like that. And DiCaprio just absolutely kills it here. He's never the butt of, he's never aware that he is taking things so seriously and that he is being so overdramatic, but that's what makes him so entertaining and so great as this character. And Rick Dalton is someone who, he plays so many different characters throughout this film because of all the films that we see him shoot, and that can be hard for any actor to do, but when you have someone like Leo, who is such a great character actor and is so great at just channeling all these different sides of himself, he really does kill it here, and I do very much see him being nominated for another Oscar here. At least I hope he does, because I think he definitely gave an Oscar-worthy performance. There's one scene in particular with him, and you've seen the trailer, but it involves this freak-out, and it's probably some of the best work of his entire career. I loved everything about him in this role, and he just absolutely killed it here. Just seeing Dalton so obsessed with the idea of staying relevant and the idea of just perfection, that he takes his craft so seriously, and every single thing that happens to him, he's kind of a diva about. It's just hilarious to watch, and I think DiCaprio just killed it here, as he always does. But this is definitely, I think, one of the most impressive performances to date. However, it is Brad Pitt who I think really steals this entire film. And that's crazy to say when you have someone like DiCaprio. Pitt really does steal this from him. He does such a fantastic job as Cliff Booth, who is the complete opposite of Dalton. This guy is so laid back, he's very chill, but he also does have this past that he keeps going back to, and it's kind of limited him to do some things. And I think Pitt does a really great job with bringing out that emotion in the character, but also getting us to really relate to this guy. This is a guy who he is very accepting of the change going on in the industry, while Dalton is kind of inherently against it. And I think he definitely did a really great job. He's such a badass and fun character, and I really love what Pitt was able to do here. But it's the chemistry between these two that is absolutely the thing that anchors this entire film. The film works off of them so well together. They have such a natural chemistry, and easily are probably my favorite dynamic duo of the entire year. The way these two rely on each other, the different sort of perspectives they have on things, and how that really helps the other, I just really love seeing. And I think the two of them just had such amazing chemistry here, and I loved everything about these two in the film. They're easily one of the best things about it for sure, and I think definitely I can't really see anyone else bringing to this film what DiCaprio and Pitt did. They just did such an incredible job. Like I said, I'm really hoping they get that Oscar love. They very much do deserve, but Pitt especially needs to get something. Someone else that a lot of people are going to be a little bit concerned about just because of what she's doing here is Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate, and I can tell you right now, she is, once again, gives another great performance here. Sharon Tate is not in this movie as much as you think, but for all of her limited scenes, Robbie very much pours out so much emotion into this character. She really does become Sharon Tate, someone who is, in this film, she's very innocent, she's very wide-eyed, she loves the fact that she is this Hollywood star. You know, she loves people giving her attention, she doesn't really care that she isn't getting as much recognition, she's just grateful that she is starting to branch out more, and that she's starting to get more roles. And I think Robbie did a really great job with kind of contrasting that and who Rick Dalton is as a character. And I really did love what Margot Robbie did here for sure. I think she was perfectly casted, and I really did love everything about Sharon Tate here. There's one scene with her, especially in a movie theater. She doesn't really have a lot of dialogue in that scene, but just her facial expressions are just excellent, and it really does show how talented Robbie is as an actress. The way she's able to convey so much emotion, but really not having that much, without really having that much dialogue, I think in itself is extremely impressive, and really just shows how talented of an actress she really is here, and I think she gave probably one of her most impressive performances yet as a result. And as far as the rest of the cast goes, I mean, everyone does a fantastic job here. Al Pacino is, it's just so great to see him in a really good film again. I think he doesn't have a lot to do in this movie, but he definitely makes the most of his screen time for sure. Emile Hirsch really impressed me here as Jay Sebring, who, I mean, compared to the Jay we saw in The Haunting of Sharon Tate, this is a completely different guy altogether, and I really like what they did. It gave me a much clearer understanding of who Jay Sebring is, and I think Hirsch really brought a lot to the table here for sure. Dakota Fanning, I thought, was really good. Margaret Qualley, as usual, is fantastic here. I'm so happy to see her starting to branch out more as an actress. I've always really loved her. Between this, Fosse Verdon, and a couple other things she has been doing lately, I think she's really starting to become that great actress that I know she can be, and I really love what she's been doing lately, making some really great choices. It is also probably the best work I've ever seen from Austin Butler. I thought he was honestly pretty menacing here, and I thought he definitely did do a really good job. All of the Manson family is very well casted for sure. I think everyone really did work quite well here. However, for me, one of the biggest standouts for sure that I don't think enough people are talking about is Julia Butters, this little girl that Dalton interacts with, who he's working on this movie with. probably one of the most talented and hilarious child performances I've seen in a while. She's this precocious little girl that is this method actress, and she is just fantastic. I really hope after this movie that she's in a lot of things, because I feel like people are going to look at her here, and they're going to see the potential she has, and hopefully she starts to get more roles, because I fucking loved her here. I think she was so great in this movie, and definitely one of the best parts of it for me. Everyone does such a great job, and even though some of these actors, like, say, Mike Moe as Bruce Lee, Kurt Russell pops up, Bruce Dern, you know, some of these actors don't have as much to do as you might expect. They all make the most of their screen time, and as a result, there really isn't a single weak link in this entire cast. I think everyone really did bring something to the point where even if they have a really small role, like, say, like I said, like Mike Moe or something, like Bruce Lee was really only in like 2 scenes, they still are very memorable, and they still do bring a lot here for sure. But now let's get to the directing and the writing here, which I feel like above everything else, that's probably the most interesting part of this movie, because when you go to a Quentin Tarantino film, there are certain things that you are expecting. You're expecting a very high-octane film that is just very energetic, and definitely it's just really fast-paced, and it's relentless, and it's got all this bloody action, and while this film definitely is very entertaining, in fact, it's probably the most entertaining film to come out this year, minus Avengers Endgame, it's much different directing-wise than most of his films. I know everyone has said this, and yes, it's going to sound repetitive, but this truly is the most non-Tarantino film that he's ever done. And don't look at that at all as a negative. I really admire the fact that this film is very different. Tarantino, he is able to do his normal thing, like the quippy lines and having that great snappy dialogue, but also having that really energetic tone, but he really does kind of restrain himself, and as a result, he makes this feel a lot more personal and a lot more authentic, which is not something you can say for a lot of Tarantino films, but I really do appreciate that, and it makes a lot of sense considering that this film, the time period it's taking place, is based on his childhood. This is when Tarantino grew up. This is everything that he loves. You know, if you know anything about Tarantino, you know, he loves his roots, but he also loves movies, and this film very much feels like a passion project for him. That film that he's wanted to make for a very long time, but he's just never had the time or effort to do it, and now he finally has, and it's just really great to see. And I think it really does show just how versatile and talented of a director we're really working with here. And I really do think after this movie, people are going to stop saying that, oh, Tarantino just pigeonholes himself to the same genre, because that's very much not the case here. This film is much more of just a fun, breezy, hangout comedy than you are probably expecting. And I really do adore that. The film definitely does get dramatic, and it does eventually get a little bit crazier, but for a while, this is a much more lower stakes and much more just fun kind of film, and I really do appreciate the fact that Tarantino did that here, and I think his directing, as a result, is probably some of his strongest yet, and if there's ever been a film, and I know he's gotten Best Director before, but if there is any film that he needs to be nominated for, it's this one, because it really just shows his craft here. We've truly never seen Tarantino direct a film like this before, and I'm very, very happy to see that here, and I think he just did it so well here for sure. You can tell the respect he has for the Hollywood industry, but you can also tell the love he really does have for it, and how much admiration he has, and how much he just implements into the film. He just does such a great job with directing wise, and I really did love it here. But it's the writing as well that really does stick out here, and this could be a problem for some people, because yes, while the movie definitely I do think has a story, it's not a very complex story. It's a very basic story of Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth, and them basically just trying to get by. You know, ostensibly, the world is changing, and Rick Dalton, as I've said before, he's kind of against it. He doesn't really know what to make of it. He feels he is starting to fade away as an actor, that people just aren't gravitating towards him as much as they once did. and he's having to do these films that he just isn't very fond of, spaghetti westerns especially. He's offered that very early on in the film, and he doesn't really hold this to a very high standard. He feels like that's the bottom of the barrel, and he just doesn't really know what he's going to be able to do anymore. But then you contrast that with Cliff Booth, and he's someone who is far more optimistic. He's someone who, he's just kind of accepting of what's happened, even though he himself has been through a lot of shit. And you can see why he is the way he is because of that. And I think Tarantino does a really great job with giving you just enough information to where even when there isn't a lot going on with these characters, we are still extremely compelled. Something as simple as just Cliff Booth driving around or feeding his dog is somehow really compelling. I don't know how he's able to do it, but he really does some great work here with these characters. And I honestly didn't really care that they didn't have a lot going on character-wise. They do, but again, it's not stuff that is affecting them in this very moment. It's stuff that's eventually going to affect them, but the movie is far more concerned with showing them at their high point, showing how they deal with this, showing how they are, you know, they start to accept it more and how they move forward. And I think that's something that Tarantino overall just did a really great job with. I like the fact that this film didn't have an overly complex story, because that's just not something we've seen from the last time. You know, the closest film that I can relate this to in terms of writing is probably Jackie Brown, which is a very simple heist film. This film is like that, except it's a very simple film about Hollywood. Now, that being said, just because this film doesn't have a lot going on story-wise, that doesn't mean it still doesn't have a lot to say, because it absolutely does. The film is very much, I think, about the idea of adapting, you know, having to learn to adapt to society, even when it's one that you don't really recognize anymore. That's something that Rick Dalton kind of has to learn in this movie. Also, the idea of just change in general is something that I think we all are kind of scared of, similar to how Rick Dalton is in this movie, and I think they do a good job with that. And Tarantino kind of takes what's going on today with the shift that we are currently undergoing, you know, in the media with like streaming services and things like that, and you know, uses that in terms of the transition from more innocent filmmaking to a much more mature style, which is not something that really people like Rick Dalton were used to at the time, but it was very quickly happening. Audiences were just starting to get tired of just the golden age of Hollywood. They wanted much more mature and relatable storytelling, and I think that's something that the film does get into quite well, for sure. So I actually did think that stuff was very well handled here, and the commentary that it has on the movie industry and things like that is also really great. And again, a lot of it is played for comedy, definitely, and I will definitely say this is easily one of Tarantino's best, funniest films. In fact, it might just be his funniest film. There are so many great gags here. Just some of the best scenes in this movie are just seeing Rick Dalton play all these characters and how into it he gets, and how every so often he might slip up or something like that, or he might, you know, miss a line, or he might do something that he doesn't really like about a character, and just things like that I just thought were so entertaining, and the film just gets Hollywood so well in that regard, and that's something I very much enjoyed about it, for sure. But when talking about this film, I think the one thing that most people are going to be very worried about is the portrayal of the Manson family. When we first heard that Tarantino was doing a film in Hollywood, I think that was something that all of us were very wary about. I myself wasn't too worried about it because of how he's done it in Inglourious Basterds and things like that. I had a feeling he pulled it off quite well, and I have to say he absolutely delivered. I think he did a very good job with paying respect to what happened, especially when it comes to Sharon Tate, who very much is the beating heart of this movie. Even though she's really not in this movie as much as you think she is, she's in it, I think, just enough to show what Tarantino is going for. He's basically trying to honor her legacy, make us look at the woman that Sharon Tate could have been. Someone who was really just this innocent woman who wanted to make it big in Hollywood, was okay by the fact that she wasn't that well recognized, and just really appreciated that she was in there and was really just carefree and very, like I said, wide-eyed in that way, and I think he did a very good job with that. But as far as the Manson family goes, the way that that's handled is not at all probably the way you expect. But I think it's the way that it should have been handled. Instead of him just, it's similar to how in Inglourious Basterds and Django Unchained, he really shows the Nazis and the race, the slave owners for who they were. He does that here, however, he doesn't try to make them menacing. Instead, he kind of just portrays them as like these incompetent idiots who were very in over their head and clearly didn't really know what they were doing. And I feel like that was the right way to go about it. These guys are insane. They are absolutely just crazy. And I think he definitely did a very good job with that for sure. I can understand if some people have an issue with it, but again, this film, it's supposed to be slightly fantastical in that way. And I feel like the way that he characterized the Manson family, he kind of makes like a mockery out of them. Like he shows like these were idiots and that these were people that were very much brainwashed and didn't know what the hell they were doing. And I think he did a very good job with that here for sure. And the way that Rick and Cliff eventually do become intertwined with the Manson family, I think is also very well handled. As shown in the trailers, yes, Cliff does get himself involved, but it never feels like they're overdoing it. It never feels like Tarantino is doing too much to the point where it just doesn't feel real. It feels like if this scenario, this very much could have happened. This very much could have been what ends up going down, and I think he handled that quite well here. And again, a lot of it is played for comedy, but it's never trying to glorify the actions of what Manson and his followers were doing. It's just the way that Tarantino is approaching it, I think was genius in that way, and I think he just did a very good job with, again, considering the way that Rick and Cliff are as characters, it makes sense why he approaches it the way he does here, and I think for the most part, people are going to be okay with the way he does it here. I can see some people being on the fence about it, but I feel like for the most part, if you like what Tarantino does, I think you will overall be okay with how he approaches the Manson family here. It's a very sensitive subject for sure, but I feel like he handled it pretty well here. But like I said, the film really is contingent upon how much you care about Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth. This friendship that they have, the bromance that they have in the film, it's so integral in the film. And like I said, those two characters are so well thought out. They work so well together. They have such an infectious chemistry. And I think Cliff Booth is really the friend that we've all wanted to have, while Rick Dalton is really the person that we, kind of are probably in that friendship, and I think they do a really nice job with that. And I think, if you're in a really great friendship with that, you'll probably find yourself in either Rick or Cliff, and I think they definitely did a very good job with that for sure, and definitely for me is probably one of the best things about the movie without a doubt. Really just the entire, all of the writing here is just fantastic. I think it's definitely one of Tarantino's best screenplays to date. The dialogue is never been better. The comedy is there. It's just all very much present, but again, it's just much more looser than most films of his, and I really do appreciate it for that. So yeah, the writing here I thought was fantastic. The cinematography, though, is definitely something to talk about here. I really loved the cinematography in this movie. Robert Richardson did such a masterful job in this film. Not only does he do a great job of making this look and feel like the 60s as much as possible and making it feel like such a lived-in environment, going as far as to, remodel certain areas so it looks like the 60s. And mind you, this was not in, green screen. They actually did film this in Hollywood. So they tried to do as much as they possibly could to make it look like the 1960s, and I think they did such an incredible job with that. And not only do they pull that off very well, but it's the different ways that they pay tribute to the 1960s that very much impressed me here. I mean, this film utilizes so many different aspect ratios, so many different ways of filming as well. Sometimes this film is filmed with actual film, sometimes it's filmed in 35 millimeters, sometimes it's filmed on all these different sort of cameras, all channeling different ways that films were produced back then to make it look as accurate as possible. And I think they did such a fantastic job with that. He had a real eye for the details, and that's something I really love about this film. That's something that all Tarantino films do well, but I think this is probably one of his most detailed to date. And again, it just shows the massive amount of respect for that Tarantino has for this time period. And it really did look like you could just watch a film in the 1960s, and this would very much feel like that. And I think they did an excellent job with that for sure. Anytime that you see Rick Dalton filming something, it very much looks like a film from that time period. And I really have no idea how they pulled it off as well as they did, but oh my god, it was so well done here. And I adored the cinematography. I usually do in every Tarantino film, but it is easily some of his best to date. It blew me away here. It's very aesthetically pleasing, but it also just really pulls you in, and I think they did a really great job with just paying tribute to when things were just a little bit simpler in terms of film and things like that, and I think they did a really great job with that here. So I really did adore the cinematography here. I can't imagine how hard it was to pull off, considering that, you know, things aren't shot on film anymore, but they did a really great job with that here. The score in this movie, there isn't a score. In fact, the only score that plays is music from 1969, and I think this was a brilliant choice because Tarantino, he's trying to make this feel like a very lived-in environment, and if he were to add some kind of score, I honestly feel would undermine the film. The fact that he has the score, it's a very deliberate choice, but I feel like it was definitely the right choice, because the film is very much trying to honor the time when, you know, you just crank the music up constantly. There were, you know, records and things like that, and there was all kinds of, you know, the 60s had very specific tone in terms of music, and all the music that's played here is really great, and I think definitely he did a really great job with it. I mean, it helps that a lot of his movies already has music like this. This is kind of like his main, this is kind of like his go-to when it comes to songs he plays. So he gets to go a lot more nuts with it here and go all out. And I love the fact that there wasn't really a score. In fact, when there's not music playing on a radio, because almost all of the music in this movie is diegetic, mind you, which I thought was really cool. A very interesting choice. Like, characters will turn off the radio and the music will stop playing. And again, I know it's a very small thing, but it is something that I very much notice. He really is trying to make this feel like you are right in there. It doesn't feel like a movie in that sense, and I really love that in terms of the score here. And the editing, yes, this film is long, but it's Tarantino. What do you really expect? And I have to say, similar to most of his films, there was not a single time in this movie where it dragged for me. I was into it the entire time, and even when a very simple conversation was going on, I still was entertained. I still was very hooked into what was going on. There really wasn't a point in this movie where I felt they needed to cut that out or it was dragging for me. I really do feel this film very much utilized its runtime and got the most out of its actors for sure. And again, because of how much you love these characters, you know, no matter how long the film goes, you're just so into what's going on. I think the editing was just so well done here. There's one cut, though, especially, that very much threw me off, but in a good way. I really love where they end up going with it. And that leads into the thing that I know a lot of people are probably going to be very divisive on, and that is the ending of this movie. You know, a lot of people have been worried about how they are going to handle this, how are they going to do all of the Manson murders and things like that. And I really was never that worried because of how Inglourious Basterds turned out and how well he handled that. But I will say, I wasn't worried until the film started to get there. I was really worried, like, oh god, is he really not going to do this well? Is it going to completely fall apart here? Like, I was visibly shaking with tension, and I was really worried how he was going to pull it off. And then, without spoiling anything, where he ends up going, he very much takes the Inglourious Basterds route. And it went from something that I was very worried about to one of the funniest and I think most creative choices he's ever made in his career. I think it is absolutely brilliant. I was howling with laughter. It's easily one of the best climaxes of the entire year. It's one of the best climaxes Tarantino has ever done, and the way he was able to get me from being so utterly terrified of what was going to happen to howling with laughter, and then at the very end, without spoiling anything, given this very bittersweet and melancholy sort of feeling, and almost having me on the verge of tears. I mean, hats off to him. I cannot praise him enough for doing that. When you're able to get me with that many emotions in the span of only like 15 or 20 minutes, that's masterful. That's how you direct a fucking movie. And that's why Tarantino is one of the greatest out there right now. There's really not many directors that are able to get me to do that and go through that many emotions all at once. But he very much did that, and I cannot praise him enough. Guys, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is everything that you expect from Tarantino, but it's even more than you are expecting. This is a film that deliberately does hold himself back. It's one that is much more concerned about just the liveliness and fun of these characters and their lives at the time, and them trying to just navigate this environment that is very slowly changing. It's very much heightened by its cast. Everyone just does such an incredible job here. Margot Robbie, Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, all of them really do a fantastic job in this movie. The entire cast really does a great job, but it really is those three that are very much a standout here. The cinematography is just immaculate, and again, I really don't know how they pulled off as well as they did. The characters are so well written. It feels like a very lived-in environment in that way, and the things that are just so great about it, and that Tarantino does best, they are very much present here, but they're done in a much more different and more authentic way than you really are expecting. The film is very heartwarming in that sense, and that's not something that you can say most times about a Tarantino film, that this film kind of tugged at my heartstrings a bit, but there were moments that definitely did that here, and again, I think it just shows how great of a director he really is. I don't feel he gets credited enough for doing something like this, but it really does show how versatile he is, and I think we really do owe a lot to him with this film to really just solidify just how talented he really is here. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is easily, I think, one of his best to date. It's his most personal. It's the film that very much does feel like his passion project, and I know that Tarantino is saying that he possibly wants to stop here, and I have to say, if this truly is the last film that he's doing, what a hell of a way to go out. I really can't think of a better film to close out a amazing career with than Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This just feels like the film he's been building up to. It feels like his magnum opus in that way, and I think in general is definitely one of his most unique to date. I absolutely adored everything about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's easily the most fun I've had with any film this year. Well, minus Endgame, of course, but again, minus Avengers Endgame, this is easily the most fun, it's the most entertaining, and it's definitely one of his best to date. And of course, I'm going to give Once Upon a Time in Hollywood an A+. Seriously, guys, do yourself a favor and check this one out. There really is nothing out there right now quite like it, and that's one of the reasons why Tarantino deserves as much money as he possibly can get. I mean, again, there really are just not many directors out there right now like him who are just always challenging themselves, and this film, more than ever, he is very much doing that, and that alone just shows why it is very much worth your time. But either way, guys, in my review, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, let me know what you guys saw this movie overall, lift your thoughts in it, let me know what you guys thought of this movie, of course. Where does it rank on your Tarantino list? If you guys want to see mine, I will link my list down below, so definitely check that out. This one definitely is in like the top 6 or 7 for sure. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoy it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.